All right, welcome back. In this video, we will continue with this to-do application, and you can see that what we've done previously was these two models. So we've done the user and the to-do, and then we've done this whole to-do database with all the CRUD operations for both tables. Okay, so now we need to go, and I'm going to close all of these now so that we just see the services here. So we're going to go into the services section, and we're going to use user service. And this is where provider comes in now to provide the data for me. So we will use a user service with the change notifier so that provider can help us with this. And then we will also be going back and forth using this to-do database. Okay, so for the user service for this video, then you will see that at the bottom I've got this function called getHumanReadableError. So the database returns some errors for us, and we're going to pass that message through, and we're going to first check if it says unique constraint failed. So I've got message.contains. If the message contains these keywords there, unique constraint failed, then I know that the user already exists in the database. Please choose a new one, and then I will replace that message with this one that's user readable. This user already exists in the database. Please choose a new one. So that's when we go and try and register somebody new here, and that guy already exists in the database. And also we can go and say if the message contains not found in the database, then we can say the user does not exist in the database, please register first. So that will be in this first screen there if you type somebody that doesn't exist and you click on continue. Okay, so we will be using this a bit later on. Okay, so for this user service then, I want to have a current user. So I'm going to use a late declaration here at the top, and we're going to use a user object, and we're going to refer to the current user. So we'll need to use have that current user throughout the app so that when I enter the username here and I click on continue, I still have that user here, and I can show the current user's username there. Okay, so that's the current user, and also when I create a new to-do here, I want to have that current user, so I create the correct to-do for the correct user. So I'm going to use a current user there. I will also use a few Boolean values. Now, this Boolean value, I'm going to call busy create, and I'm going to set this one to false initially. So where I want to use this one is, if you remember on the pages one, we talked about registering, and we talked about this app progress. So I just want to show you the progress bar on how to use this. So to do that, we will use this busy create. So while we're busy creating, we're going to set it to true, and that will start showing. And when it's done, we will set it to false again to stop showing. Okay, and then I'll have another Boolean there to make sure that a user exists or not. Okay, and for this user exists, I want to basically use it here. So when we click or start entering a username there, and we move away from it, and it picks up that the user exists, we will set this value to true, and then it will start showing this red text there. Okay, so we'll get to that part now. So for this user, let's import it, and we use that user.data class. All right, just get some getters for these three values. So I'm going to use get current user, and we will be returning back this current user. We will also have a Boolean get busy create. We will be returning back that busy create, and then we'll have a last getter there for the user exists, and we will be returning back whether this user exists or not. Then for this user exists also, I want to just create a setter also. So for this user exists, we will have a Boolean value that we will be passing in, and that value will then be set to user exists. So we set that to the value, and then we will notify all listeners. Okay, so what will happen here, if the user exists, we set this value to true, and then it will say username exists. Otherwise, we'll set it back to false, and then it will not show. Okay, so it's just for showing and hiding this red text there. Right, so let's create a first function here that we will be using from this to-do database, and we will also use this to set our current user at the top. Okay, so for this one, we're going to use a future string value, and the string is just to send back some sort of result. So if there's an error, that will be the error. If we're sending through okay, then we know everything went fine. So we're going to send back a future string, and I'm going to call this function getUser. and I want to get a user with a specific username. And we're going to use this asynchronous. So what we're going to do here is right at the beginning, we're going to enter the username, and if we click on continue, we want to get that user and make sure that user actually exists before we're carrying on. So I'm going to set a string result here at the top, and let's set the result to OK right from the start. So if something happens, we replace that result to something else. Okay, then we're going to have a try catch block. So we're going to have a try, and we're going to have a catch block with an E there for some sort of exception message that will be happening. And inside of this try block now, I want to set up this current user. So to get the current user, I'm going to go and call await. And now I want to use a function in this to-do database. So the one I want to use is to get a user. So it's this one. So I'm going to, in order to get to this one, we're going to call instance right at the top. And that instance will get me access to all of these functions: create user, get user, and so forth. Okay, so we're going to say await, go to the to-do database.instance, call the function get user, that's the one I want to use, and I'm going to pass in this username. And that's all I need to do because that function is already created there. So we're passing in the username, and it will get back to me one user. Okay, so that user will then become our current user. If there's something wrong there, it will throw the exception, and we can then set the result to something else. So first, after we've got that current user, we will notify all listeners. So just remember, it will not get to notify listeners if this line actually gives an error. Then the listeners won't be notified. Okay, so in the catch block then, we want to set the result as, and I'm going to call this function now at the bottom, get human readable error, and I'm going to pass in e.toString. Okay, so if that is either unique constraint failed or this one, then it's going to replace it with one of these. Otherwise, you can see it's just going to replace with the same message again. Okay, so that message just goes through straight through and get back again to the result if we cannot convert it to something that we know. And then at the end, after the try and the catch block, we can just go and say return the result. Okay, and we can save this one. Right, and that's the get user. That's as easy as it gets. Okay, so now we can go and create the next function there. So we got get user there to get the user with error handling and so forth. And you'll see inside of the UI then, where we get the user, when we click on continue, we can check for the result okay. If the result is okay, then we continue. Otherwise, we will show that toast, or not the toast, that go to widgets, we will show the snack bar. Okay. Right, so the next one then, we've got the user. Now the next one I want to do is also a future, and most of these you'll see we're going to get back a string so that we can get the result okay or some error that occurs. And for this one, I want to check if a user exists. Now for this, I will also pass in a username, and it's also going to be asynchronous. And where I want to use this is when we're creating a new user here. So when we type something there and we move away, we want to check if the user exists. Okay, so in order to do that, we're going to have a string result as well. So we're going to say string result equals okay again, right at the top. Again, we will have a try and we'll have a catch block. Now at the top, I will just call await, go to the to-do database.instance. So that gets me an instance of the database. And again, I want to call this get user. So same as we did here, we want to get the user and we're going to pass it in. So now this one, so we're going to use this get user to make sure that this user actually exists here. So if we call get user and it returns back okay, then we know that we've got a user that already exists in the database and we can just move along and get him into his to-do list. But if that user does not exist, it will go to the catch block and it will say this user does not exist in the database, please register first. Okay, now this one is a bit different because check if a user exists, we want to use it here. So we're going to start typing there something, the result will be okay. Again, we're going to do this part. This part will throw an exception if the user does not exist. So if it throws an exception, then we actually know it's fine because we're registering a new user. So basically sending back the same type of data, but we're using it for different things. So in this case, we want to make sure that it's actually not okay. Because if it's not okay, then it's okay to actually register the user. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So let's go into the catch block here, and we will just say result equals e.toString, and we will just be returning that result. So for this one, if it's not okay, then it's fine. We can continue and register. But if it is actually okay, it means that the user exists and we should show this red text there. So I hope you get that concept. Actually, here we can also use this get human readable error and go to e.toString also. Okay, so now the next function that we can use here is again a future string that we will be returning, which will either have the result of okay or it will have some sort of error. And for this one, we're going to use update the current user. Now, we don't have a function to update the current user, but I just want to show you how this one will work also. So maybe we can just pass in a name there, because the only thing that we wanted to change for this user could be probably his name. Okay, and we will be referring to the current user to change his name then. Okay, so we've got update current user, and we will have the string result as okay. I'm going to go to the current user, change the name. So I'm going to say .name equals this name that was passed in. So changing the current user's name. And then we can go and notify the listener. So if you listened for the name here and you changed it in settings, let's say you were in the to-do list and you had a settings here and you changed the name, then this name must change here. So you notify the listeners. And then we need to update that new user's name. So we will go into the database again and try and update it. So we'll need to have the try and the catch blocks. So in the try block, we will say await to-do database again .instance, and we're going to call update the user. Which user do we want to update? Well, in this case, it's the current user. So I'm going to pass in that current user to update the current user. And then if something happens, we will set the result to e.toString. And then at the end, we will just return the result. In fact, we can again use this get human readable error e.toString. Okay, so if it's not found in the database, it will also show that, but yeah, it should not actually give us that error at all. So actually we could have just said result is e.toString. But if it's not one of these ifs, it will in any case be the e.toString. Right, then the last function for this user service will then just be to create a new user. So we're going to use future, again a string, so that we can get any errors that occurred. We will be using create user again. That is the function's name. We will pass in a user that we want to create, and we will have it as asynchronous. So we're going to create a new user by passing in a new user object. Okay, so we're going to say string result equals okay again. Now, because I want to show or start showing this as soon as we click register here, I want to show you that progress bar. So what we want to do then is to change this busy create then to true. So we will say busy create should be true now, and we can notify the listeners so that that progress bar will start showing. And then we'll use the try and the catch block, and again that E error message there. In the try, I will go and say await to do database .instance .create the user, and I'm going to pass in that user that I want to create, which is the one that we passed in, and that will create the user for me. But because this happens so fast, we won't even see this progress bar running. So what I'm going to do just for now here, but please don't do it in your normal applications, just for you to actually see that one. So I'm going to use a future dot delayed here, and I'll have a duration of, let's say, 2 seconds. Okay, so basically all I want to do is to stop the application here for 2 seconds so that you can see that progress bar. So in a real application, you will not do this. Okay, because this happens real fast and you don't even need that progress bar showing. Okay, then inside of the catch, we can go and say result equals get human readable error, and we can go and say e.toString. Right, then at the end, whether there was an exception or not, we will set that busy create equal to false now. So we can stop showing that progress bar, and we will need to notify all the listeners of that value change, and then we can return the result. Right, so when we're creating a new user, here, we click on register here to create a new user. We set the result to OK. We set start showing that progress bar. We notify all the listeners, so it start showing. We go into the try, and we actually create the new user. If there's an exception that occur, we catch it there and we set the result, and we return that result. If the exception does not occur there, then we have this delay for 2 seconds to actually see that progress bar, and then we set busy create to false. We notify the listeners, and we return the result as OK. Right, and that's it for the user service. Right, so let's do the to-do service quickly. So for to-do service, there's basically, if you go back and we go to continue, we just want to have this list, and that's all. So the only thing we will be providing here is a list of to-dos. Okay, so it's a list of to-do objects, and let's call it to-dos, and we set it off as an empty list right from the start. So just control dot on that to import the package. Okay, then we will have a getter for this. So we're going to have a list to-do get to-dos, and we will be returning back this list of to-dos. So currently it is empty, but as soon as we call the database function there in the to-do database, we will be getting a list of to-dos. So let's get the to-dos. So we're going to use a future string again, like we did previously, to get back a message. We're going to call get to-dos, passing in a username, and it will be asynchronous. So if you look at your get to-dos here, let me just look at this one. There's your get to-dos. It needs a username. Okay, so that's what we're passing in. We're passing in the username to get the to-dos for a specific user. Right, so we have a try block in here, a try catch block again, to catch some sort of exception there. So we will get the to-dos now. So we will say to-dos equals await to-do database again, dot instance, dot get to-dos. So we want to get all the to-dos, passing in that username. Then we're going to call notify all the listeners. So we'll have only one listener here in the list that listens for this list to update. And as soon as it updates from the database, it will show the new data in the list. In the catch block, we will just return e.toString. Otherwise, if we get to this line, we will be returning OK. So you can do the same as we did in the previous one, where you have the different result variables at the top. But this is essentially doing the same thing. Okay, so we are returning e.toString if there's an exception. Otherwise, we return OK. And that's it for the get to-dos. Now, one other feature that we have here is to actually delete it and to also add it. So let's do the delete one first. So we're going to go to a future string again. We try to delete something that doesn't exist or whatever. So we're going to say future string delete the to-do, passing in that to-do that we want to delete. And we're going to use it as an asynchronous function again. Now, if you go to your delete to-do here, you can see it accepts a to-do object. So that's why we're passing in a whole to-do object. Okay, going to have a try and a catch block again. Maybe I should copy and paste this try and catch block because we're using it the whole time. So I'll copy it and we will paste it the next time. Okay, so for this try block then, again, we're going to use await. Go to the to-do database .instance, and we want to call delete to-do, passing in that to-do. Really easy to do. Okay, and then we go into the catch block. We will be returning e.toString if there's an exception that occurred, and then we can go and return actually an OK here. Okay, so we can do this. But now, as soon as we delete this to-do, then this whole list of to-dos should actually update. Okay, so what I want to do then, if we are done deleting, and we know this part has actually executed successfully, after the try catch, we can then go and say, let's say string result equals, and I'm going to call the await, and I'm going to call that get to-dos again, passing in a username. So for this to-dos then, it will be this to-do dot username that was passed in. So for the same user, I'm going to call get to-dos, which will update this list of to-dos again, and it will notify the listeners. So as soon as I delete one from the database and it's gone, and we call get to-dos again, it will see that that one is gone, and it will update this list again. And then instead of returning OK, we can actually just return this result. Why result? Because getToDos will return OK, which will also then return OK here. Or it could show an exception, and then it will show the exception. Okay, so if there is an exception in this try block, we will just return that exception because then something went wrong, and we don't want to actually get the new to-dos. But if this part did not finish, then we actually want to get all the to-dos back again. So we want to update this list and make sure that that new or that value that was deleted is now out of the list. And this getToDos will run this, which will get the new list of to-dos there, and it will notify the listener, which is this one. Okay, so that is the delete to-do. Right, then also we want to create a new to-do here. Okay, so let's see how we do that one. So it's going to be future string again. Let's call it create to-do. Pass in a to-do object, and it's going to be asynchronous. Now, if you look at the database class to create a to-do, we pass in a to-do. Okay, so that's exactly what we're doing here. Passing in that to-do, and now inside of this create to-do, we can have our try catch block again. And inside of the try, we will have await to-do database.instance again, and we want to call create to-do. And we're passing in the to-do. See how easy that is. In the catch block, same thing again. We will just be returning e.toString. And now the same thing as we did here. We want to do exactly this same thing again. So why is that? So I'm going to again call getToDos because I added or I created a new to-do. I created a new item. I want to refresh this list of to-dos. So I will go back to the getToDos again, and it will get that newest data again for me, return OK, or throw an exception. Okay, so same as we did there. So there we delete one, there we add one. Both of them is making a change to the list, and that's why we need to get the list again. Okay, then we can go to the last one, which is just the changing of the to-do here. So if we click this to-do value there, we want to change that done. Either done, yes, or it's not done. Okay, so how do we do that? So it's again a future string. Let's call this one toggle because I think we called it toggle here also. Toggle to do done. So we're going to do the same thing. Toggle to do done. And we will pass in the to do object that we want to toggle. So this one will be asynchronous also. And if you look at this to do database of ours, it needs that to do, and it will change it from to do done to not to do done. Okay, so that's what we want to do here. So inside of this, we will have our, no, I didn't copy it again. Okay, so we'll have a try and a catch block. And for the try, we will have await to do database.instance, and we're going to call that toggle to do done, passing in that to do that we want to toggle. In the catch block, we will say return e.toString, and then because that value changed again, we want to do exactly the same as we did for those. So at the end, we want to go and call that getToDos again, updating the whole list because then some data changed in the list, and we want to be returning back the result. Right, and that is it for these two service classes. So the to-do service and the user service, we now are using with some error handling. We are making sure that everything works fine. So now we are ready in the next video to actually go to the user interface and see if we can make this whole application work. Thank you very much for watching this video. See you in the next one.